Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CLAT online classes of time. Today, I'm taking a very important topic, and this particular topic has its bearing on two of the sections that you have in CLAT. The first one is English, which is reading comprehension, and the second one would be logical reasoning. Now, as we go on today's session, I'll be telling you why this has so much of an importance. But standalone logical reasoning section alone, you have about 20% of the CLAT paper comes from logical reasoning questions. And the other 25% that comes in from English has a lot of reading comprehension passages. The approach towards that is the same as the approach towards logical reasoning. Now, today what we're doing is that I'll be explaining to you the contours of logical reasoning, the different kinds of passages which you would be exposed to, and the kinds of question and how you should approach them. First of all, let's understand what logical reasoning is all about. As the very name suggests, it means that you have to use only logic, no intelligence, no memory. So essentially, it's a common sense thing. And when you talk about reasoning part of it, that means that you have to take the argument forward. You have to find out the line of reasoning of the author, and if asked for, if required, take that same line of the reasoning forward. Which means that you need to be able to read the evidence that is given to you, understand it completely, and use logic alone to select your choices. Right. Now let's try to understand what logical reasoning is also called critical reasoning in a different avatar. Let's try to find out what this logical reasoning process is all about. Right. Now I'll like your attention for maybe about 5-10 minutes, where without going into the text, I'll try to explain to you face to face what exactly is the process. Right now, just imagine that you and I are face to face, and I have a point of view which I want to convey to you. And I need to convince you of that. Every person who has to convince somebody of his point of view, first of all, brings up what his point of view is. And then he substantiates it with certain evidences. If you're not convinced with the first evidence, then he adds on some more evidence. But the objective is to convince you. Now, at one end of the spectrum, you have the speaker or the reader or the author who is building up the argument. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the listener or the reader. Now, what does the author do? The author has a point of view which he wants to convey to you. So what he does is that he picks up some evidence, maybe one or more, and his entire argument revolves around that. And he comes to a conclusion. That conclusion he presents to you. Now, this entire process is presented to you by the way of an argument. Argument doesn't mean there's a dispute or a discord. It just means that this is his point of view, which is conveyed in a package to you. Now, his objective is to convince you of this. Now, let's try to find out what all is the process. And I'll take some examples. I'll take something which is very simple first. Let us say that I have a viewpoint and I've got two bits of evidences. My first bit of evidence is that Ram is a man. The second bit of evidence I have is that man is mortal. Right? These are the two bits of evidences. Now I combine these two together and I try to tell you that hence Ram is mortal. Now you can understand what I did was that there are two bits of interrelated evidences. I packaged it together and I came to a conclusion and presented it to you. Right? This is the simple form. This is called syllogism. However, logical reasoning or critical reasoning takes syllogism a bit further. Now, these two bits of evidences, Ram is a man, man is mortal, these are what you call premises. Premises are those evidences which are verifiable, which means that you can go back in history, look at the records, check out the data, and you can convince yourself of the fact that, yes, this has happened or this is true. So anything that is verifiable is obviously factual. So in this case, we had two premises. We combined two premises and both are factual, right? Two premises both are factual, which means that both of them cannot be disputed. Premises cannot be challenged. You have to take it as truth. So if you have two facts, two truths combined together, obviously the argument will be strong and the conclusion will be valid. Right? However, the problem is that not all cases are so simple. There would be some cases where the author may have a premise, but that alone will not lead you to a straightforward conclusion. Because the author is operating on one premise and something else which is not stated in the argument at all. And that what is not stated in the argument, the author takes to be a fact, takes it to be a premise. Why does the author do that? Because there is something in the original premise that he has talked about, which convinces him that the unsaid part of the argument is also a premise. So he uses a premise, a stated premise. He uses an unstated premise, combines this together and comes to an argument, comes to a conclusion. So in this case, what happens? The argument consists of a premise and a conclusion. But there is a missing link. And that missing link is the unstated premise. And that unstated premise is called assumption. Assumption is something that the author takes to be a fact. And he takes to be a fact because there is something in the premise that tells him that this could be factual. And he presents the argument. So now, what you must understand is that you have heard the author. The author has the advantage of knowing what the assumption is. You have the disadvantage of not knowing what the assumption is. So it is up to you to logically try to find out what could be that assumption that the author is operating on. Just to give you an example. Suppose I say that it's extremely cloudy outside. I think I'll take my umbrella to office. Now, let's break this up. There are only two parts. The first part is that it is extremely cloudy outside. What you got to ask yourself is, what is that part of the argument? Is it an assumption? Is it a premise? Or is it a conclusion? Now, it's extremely cloudy outside. You can open up the window and look outside. You can verify that this is indeed cloudy. So actually that part of it is the premise. And the second part of it, hence I will take my umbrella to work, is the conclusion. And that conclusion is derived from the premise. But now let's think a bit more carefully, think a bit deeper. You may be able to understand it because the argument is very simple. But suppose I was talking to somebody who's 5 years old or 7 years old. The question that would be running in his mind would be, why should he take an umbrella to work if it is cloudy? Right? Now, the premise is that it is extremely cloudy outside. The assumption, now my assumption that I am making is based on the premise, and the premise is that it's cloudy outside. So my assumption is that it is likely to rain heavily. But I have not stated that in the passage, in the argument. I don't need to, because you would understand the gist of it. And then I come to the conclusion that I'm going to take an umbrella to work. So if you can see what the assumption actually is, it's that link between the two stated parts of the argument, the premise and the conclusion. Your job is, when they ask you to find out what the assumption is, your job is to find out what that missing link is. Right? Now, this is the bare bones of a logical reasoning exercise. But let's move a bit further, and then I'll take you to the structure, explain to you what all is required of you in logical reasoning. Right. So logical reasoning, as CLAT says it, or critical reasoning like I told you, it's an independence testing section, and it is connected to verbal ability. Now, how you go about this exercise is that there are 4 or 5 different variants of questions that you are likely to be exposed to. First one is that you could be just given a statement. And then you will have a question which asks you something regarding that statement, an aspect of the statement. So, for example, you may have that voting must be made compulsory. And then you have 2 choices. And one of them says that it will lead to a more participative India. 2, it will lead to cleaner politics. Which of these is likely to be true if the first one is done? Right? So that kind of a question. We'll come to that later on. But right now, I want to just give you a gist of, an example of what this kind of statement. So one statement and then 2 choices. Different ways, different questions can be asked in that, but just one statement and 2 choices. Right? Another one could be that you have a set of statements, not much, 2 or 3 statements, and then they are linked together. You have to find out whether A follows B or B follows A. Right? So this is the second variety. The third variety is that you will have a very short passage, about 50 words, and you would be asked a question. And you have to pick up from those 4 choices. The other part of it is that you will have a larger question, a paragraph, which is about 150 to 400 words. This will have a lot of information. And you have the same process. You'll have a question and you'll have 4 choices. Now, please understand that your approach to all these 5 varieties would be different. You cannot use a one-size-fits-all for approach to all these 5 things. For example, in the one single statement, you don't need to actually do anything else other than read the statement. The answer is there. Whereas if you have, in the case of E, a very lengthy passage of 450, 500 words, there would be so much of information in that which is be of no use at all to you. So you would actually need to be able to understand that, the passage in its entirety. And when you look at the question, you need to navigate to that spot where this particular part is likely to be explained. The other parts of the passage is of no consequence to you. However, what you got to understand very clearly is that in the case of logical reasoning and critical reasoning, like I told you earlier, this tests only logic. This does not test your intelligence or your memory. So please stick to the boundaries of the passage. Do not extrapolate it. Don't go out of it. Don't look at the passage and say that, look, I know about this. This is likely to happen. You have to only operate with the information that is given in the passage. Right? What does the logical reasoning question test? It identifies the role that the statement. You've got to identify what is the role of the statement. Is it introducing a topic? Is it giving a recommendation? Is it talking about, is it doing an analysis? So this is what you got to do in terms of identifying the role of any statement. It need not be one statement. It can be a statement in any part of the passage. Then you got to identify what is the purpose of this. What does the author actually want to tell you? See, there's no point in your not knowing what the author's message is. Because if you don't know that, then your entire logical reasoning exercise goes for a toss. So you should be able to identify the purpose of the passage. And then you have various evidences given. You have to connect these together. You may also have external information given in the choices that you have got. You need to use that external information connected to the evidences and make a meaningful connection. Now, for example, let's talk about the same case about it's extremely cloudy outside. Now, suppose I were to tell you that, and you are not a very easy person to convince. I tell you that, look, it's going to rain today. And you ask me, why do you say that? And I tell you that, look, it's extremely cloudy outside. And you tell me that, look, there have been many occasions when it's been cloudy and it just blows away and there's no rain. So I'm not convinced. Then I have to give you additional information. And I tell you that, look, these clouds are coming in from the east, which means that it is coming from the sea. And the satellite picture shows that there is a buildup of clouds in the sea. So obviously the clouds are coming towards the land. You're still not very convinced about that. You say, no, that's true, but just pass us and go. Then I tell you that, look, the breeze that is flowing in right now is from southeast to northwest. And as per meteorological department, whenever there is a breeze flow that way, it brings rainfall if there are clouds. Now, all these are different evidences that are being presented to you. Premise will not be only one premise. There could be multiple premises. But the objective of that is to come to the conclusion which I'm presenting to you. So, like I told you in a logical reasoning exercise, you got an argument, which is the entire body, the entire, whatever I'm trying to convince you about, that's the way I present my case is the argument. And in that particular argument, I've got a premise. And then I come to a lead to a conclusion. Always understand that conclusion is the objective of the argument. What is the point in my making an entire argument if I don't come to a conclusion? The whole point is to come to a conclusion, right? So you have to connect these different premises. I told you about this 3-4 premises about the cloud. You have to connect these 3-4 premises to understand logically what conclusion I'm coming to. Right? Making arguments. Now, if I give you these 4 or 5 premises and I tell you to construct the argument, with these evidences, you should be in a position to construct the argument. And it will be easy because I am going to give you 4 or 5 interrelated evidences. Once you connect these two together and you know the thread that the connector, you will also come to the same conclusion that it is likely to rain heavily and I have to take my umbrella to work or I'm going to wear my raincoat to work. You have to be able to evaluate the argument, whether the argument that I'm making is valid, is it a strong argument or is it a weak argument? And then you have to find flaws in that. If it's a weak argument, you should be in a position to say why it's weak. You can't just say that, look, it doesn't seem right. You have to logically say this is the reason why this argument is weak. So you have to be in a position to evaluate the argument. That is the idea behind logical reasoning. All these are things that you got to do. Then evaluating a plan of action. Once I give you an argument, and then I ask you a question, based on this, what do you think is going to happen in the next 6 months? So you should be in a position to carry forward the line of reasoning and apply the line of reasoning. Look at those 4 options and apply the line of reasoning to these to find out logically which of these will suit it. Now let's look at type A and type B questions as alone. The simple statement made out here is that developed countries are the major contributors to global warming, as a majority of the highly polluting industries are located in those countries. This is straightforward, very clear. Global warming, carbon emission. Developed countries are the cause because the major source of pollution are the industries. And they are obviously in the developed countries. So they are the ones who have created this mess. So now, based on this statement, you have certain courses of action. You have to look at the course of action and say, logically, is this a way out? Is this the way forward? So let's look each of these one by one. The first one says, developing countries should take the help of extremists to destroy such industries in the developed countries. Now, this is obviously an absurd, outrageous course of action. So you got to call it far-fetched and dismiss it. It can't be the course of action. Your objective in this case is that you got a statement, and the statement is that there are highly polluting industries in the developed countries. You need to address how do we tackle that. So this is one case. Get some terrorists and ask them to bomb those industries. So it's far-fetched, so that we don't accept this. Second one says UN, with the help of developing countries, should declare war against developed countries. This too looks far-fetched. How can you declare war on the basis of pollution taking place by some other countries? Absurd course of action. This is also not there. Third one says polluting industries should start reducing the quantum of pollutants released by 1% per annum. Now, this seems to be addressing it a little logically. Now we are saying that, okay, fine, this polluting industries, the pollution has to come down. But let us look a bit deeper and find out whether in reality is this was okay. 1% per annum. By the time you eliminate the entire pollution, you're talking about 100 years. So what happens in the meantime? So this seems to be a very, very weak course of action. It's as good as no action at all. So we remove 3 also. 4 says developing countries should close down highly polluting industries if developed countries should close down highly polluting industries if developing nations ensure sufficient supply of goods to those countries. So essentially you're saying that developed countries will shut down all these factories and tell the developing countries, right, now I had a requirement of so many units of products. The same units of products you have to make and give to me, which means the factories will now come up in developing countries. But at the end of the day, the developing countries or developed countries, the polluter is the industry. So you are just shifting the polluting agent from the developed countries to the developing countries. So you're still not addressing the problem of global warming. So 4 is also not an action, course of action which you can consider. 5th one says, developed countries should take up multi-pronged measures to bring down the pollution levels quickly while keeping the effects on economy under control. Now you look at what this is. All these factories are there, and these factories lead to the wealth of the country because it produces something and it sells it. And with that sale, you get some proceeds. So that becomes the wealth of the nation, exports or domestic consumption, whatever it is. If you say shut down all these factories, how are you going to run the country? How is the economy going to survive? So you have to do something which will address the problem at the same time, not make your economy bankrupt. So here it says that you should take up developed country should take up a multi-pronged approach, not one thing alone, to bring down the pollution levels quickly, not like this 1% per annum. And at the same time, make sure the economy is not affected. So 5 becomes the course of action. So this is a typical case of a statement which you have to analyze and logical reasoning exercise. So this is the typical one statement thing. Now the second one, where is a paragraph type, where you got more than one statement. The passage is what is called a stimulus. The stimulus is the argument, the entire stimulus. That is, this stimulates you to discuss further. Then there is a question. The question tells you what the task is. What are you supposed to do? So the question will tell you that you have to go to which part of the stimulus for the answer. Then you have 4 answer choices. Logically, you have to eliminate 3. That is the contours of a logical reasoning exercise. So the logical reasoning task requires you to identify different parts of the argument. I've already told you now. Premise, assumption, which is unstated, conclusion, the argument per se, the entire argument. So identify different parts of the argument. Understand the logic in the argument. Look at how the author proceeds from his opening statement to his conclusion. You should understand the link up. Then you got to determine the correct answer choice by aligning those choices with the stimulus and eliminating the incorrect answer. So, an argument is a passage through which the author tries to convince the reader about an idea, opinion, claim, suggestion by providing supporting reasons. I explained to you just now in the beginning. Argument's idea, the basic objective of the argument is to come to a conclusion which is to convince you. Right? And that conclusion is the point of view of the author, is the author's opinion. Point of view of the author is the argument. The author's opinion is there in the conclusion. And the author's opinion can be anything. It can be the way forward. It can be a derivation of what? A derivation from the argument. Right? So, conclusion is always something which is because of the premise. Now, if you have to, as a student, if you have to simplify this, what is an argument? An argument is something where you ask the author, what are you trying to say? That is the argument. Why are you saying this? That is the premise. The answer to why are you saying this is the premise. What are you trying to say is the conclusion. Right? So conclusion is the main idea that the author is trying to convince. The argument is a bunch of words, but all of it, like an arrow or like a funnel, it converges to one point, and that one point is the conclusion. Premises, like I told you, is the supporting evidences. Supporting evidences that are presented in explicitly. It is very clearly printed. If it is not, if the supporting evidence is not there, it is an assumption, right? Let's look at this example. Cricketer X has performed disastrously in the last World Cup. Since then, in almost all the matches, his scores have been single-digit runs. This shows that he has consistently failed to perform. Therefore, he should be removed from the team. Now, if you look at this entire argument, therefore he should be removed from the team is the conclusion, because it derives, that particular line is derived from a certain set of statements. Like I told you, when you ask the author why, when the answer is that because of these reasons. So when you say therefore he should be removed from the team, so first of all you ask, what are you trying to say? He should be removed from the team. So which means that is the conclusion. What is the conclusion? Why are you saying that? Because all these. Now those things which is because all that, those becauses, because of this, those, this are premises. So in this case, the premises are that he performed disastrously in the last World Cup. It's a premise because you can always look at the records and find out, yes, he scored very badly in the World Cup. Since then, in almost all the matches, his scores have been single digit. Again, you can look at all the records and find out, yes, after the World Cup, every match, he's been single digits. Then, third premise, this shows that he has consistently failed to perform. Now, the third part of it is something which is an extension of the premise, but it still remains a premise. So these are the three premises, and then the conclusion is he should be removed from the team. Right? So, because of this, what you read out here, the conclusion is that X should be removed. And the premises are performed disaster in the World Cup, scores have been single digits in all the matches post that, failed to perform consistently. See, my friends, first of all, don't be under the impression that conclusion means something which always arrives at the end. Not necessarily. Suppose I were to say in a similar case like this, or in my case when I talked about I'm taking an umbrella to work. Remember, so I said that it's extremely cloudy outside, so I'm taking it to an umbrella to work. So, okay, fine. In this case, I'm taking the umbrella to work came at the end. Suppose I were to change it and say, hey guys, I'm taking my umbrella to work because it's extremely cloudy outside. No, just because the positioning of the sentence, the conclusion, is in the beginning itself. Will you say that because it is cloudy outside is the conclusion? No, you will not. So it can feature anywhere. That depends on the style of the author. He can have the conclusion in the beginning, he can have it in the middle, he can have it at the end. But how do you identify which is the conclusion? It is because of something. One, when you say it's because of this, I'm saying this. That thing which you're saying because of something is the conclusion. Or, what are you trying to say is the conclusion. That is the thought process. The thought process starts, it can be from a conclusion and then you take it down towards a premise. Or it can be from premise, you can take it down to a conclusion. But you should be able to identify the thought process. Now look at this first case. I think cricketer X should be removed from the team as he has consistently failed to perform. Take for instance his World Cup performance, which was disastrous, or the matches later in which he scored single digits. Now here in this case, you first have got the conclusion given. And then he is listing out the premises. Right? Now you look at the second one. Well, cricketer X has consistently failed to perform, so I think he should be removed from the team. So you got a premise and then you got a conclusion. And then he gives the other premises. He's consistently failed to perform, premise. So I think he should be removed from the team, is a conclusion. Take his World Cup performance. For instance, it is disastrous. or the matches they played after that. Now, these are also premises. So you have to be able to understand the line of thinking. Don't look at it as a set template. Okay? This I've already explained to you, that the conclusion in the above argument follows the first premise. First premise, conclusion, second premise, third premise. How do you identify the conclusion? Now, this I've already explained to you. Cricketer X has consistently failed to perform, therefore he should be removed from the team. Right? So in the above argument, the author is saying that therefore he should be. So whenever you get words like because, hence, thus, therefore, all these things as a result, resultantly, consequently, all these will give you a clue that anything that comes after this is the conclusion, right? Like he says, the author says that, okay, fine. Now, in one case, when you had the premise first and then you had the conclusion, then you had two more premises. See, this is where you get confused. So, which is what you need to find out, like I told you. How do you identify by asking a question? What is it that the author is trying to say? That is the conclusion. Why is he saying this? Becomes the premise. Because cricketer X has consistently failed to perform, he should be removed from the team. Right? The because part of it. Now, because is followed by the premise, not the conclusion. So if you go by that logic, you'll say, okay, this should be the cricketer X has consistently failed to perform is the conclusion. Right? So when you say, so premise indicators are because, since, due to. So these kind of words will tell you that that is associated with the premise. Now, like I said, you will have more than one premises. So then how do you identify that? Additionally, furthermore, these words will tell you that what is following is additional premises. Right? Other than the premises, you also have something called counter premises. That means the author gives his set of arguments first, and then he throws in some counter arguments, which is called paradox. So logically, if you say that this has happened, the clouds are built up from the east, the wind blowing is from the southeast to the northwest. However, in the last 1 month, whenever the breeze has blown from the southeast to the northwest, the clouds have scattered and gone away. Now, this second part of it becomes what is called a counter premise. And you can identify counter premises again by the same set of words, different set of words. Like in the first case, when you said additional premises were in addition to, furthermore, right? Now, in this case, these will be counter. Contrarily, nevertheless, however, yet, but. All these tell you that these are contradictory premises. This is what I was telling you, why, how test. When you say, what do you want to say? That what means that's your conclusion. Why are you saying this? Then why becomes your premise. Assumption, I've already explained to you that it is something which is unstated. Now, let me give you an example. Suppose I say that Virat Kohli is surely the best batsman in the world because he has a batting average of 69 runs. Now, break it up into the different parts. Obviously, the question is, what are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that Virat Kohli must be the world's best batsman. So that part of it becomes the conclusion. Why are you saying this? Because he has a batting average of 69. So because he has a batting average of 69 becomes your premise. Now let's try to find out what is the assumption. Now this argument still is incomplete because there is an assumption that I am making in coming to the conclusion. Excuse me. How am I doing that? I'm saying that to determine who is the world's best cricketer, I don't need to know how many centuries he scored. I don't need to know how many half centuries he scored or double centuries he scored. I don't even need to know how many catches he has taken, how many run-outs he has effected. I am only concerned about the batting average. So the assumption that I'm taking is that the only criteria to determine the world's best cricketer is the batting average. So whoever has got the highest batting average, he becomes the world's best cricketer. Now, the unsaid part of it was what I just told you, which is the assumption. But just for hypothetically, let's say that I want to make this argument stretched out by stating the assumption. How would I say it? Virat Kohli must be the world's best cricketer because he has a batting average of 69 and batting average is the only criteria for determining the world's best cricketer. This is the complete argument. But the unsaid part of it, which I have added on the end, that is the assumption. Now look at this argument again. John is a member of ABC Club. Hence, he must be a student of Ryan International. Now, this sounds very strange. There is no connection at all between Ryan International and ABC Club. How is it that you are coming to the conclusion just because John is a member of ABC Club, therefore he must be a student of Ryan International? Why can't he be a student of St. Bede's? Why can't he be a student of Delhi Public School? But the author is confident. Oh, John is a member of ABC Club. He is not from DPS. He is not from modern school. He is not from St. Bede's. He is from Ryan International. So the assumption is that the unsaid part of it is all the members of ABC Club are Ryan International students. Which is why the author came to the conclusion very swiftly, hence he must be a student of Ryan International. Right? So in this argument, the conclusion is he must be a student of Ryan International. The premise is that he's a member of ABC Club. Missing link, like I told you earlier, is the assumption. Now let's break it up. John is a member of ABC Club. All the members of ABC Club are students of Ryan International. Hence, he must be a student of Ryan International. Now that bold part of it has been put out there, whereas it is not necessary. In an argument, I don't need to. Because that is an assumption I'm taking. So this bold part of it becomes the assumption. Assumption, my dear friends, please understand, it will always be absent. Premise will always be present. It will be explicitly mentioned. assumption will never be mentioned. Okay. So in effect, you got to just keep this in mind. Premises, assumption, put together, lead to the conclusion. So if you have an argument, first of all, you got to look at it and find out, is there a conclusion first of all? If there is no conclusion, there can also be just premises are mentioned and you're expected to find out what the conclusion is. So you should be able to understand the line of reasoning of the author to come to the conclusion. So the logic of the composition must be examined. What are the premises? How do the premises relate to each other? That's very important. It can't be independent. And then do they lead to a logical conclusion? Are there any gaps in between these two? Suddenly, abruptly, it switches from the premise and goes to conclusion. Is there any gap? If there is a gap, that gap must be the assumption. Now, in the argument, there would be some quantifiers. When you say quantifiers, what does it mean? Some of the students, all of the animals, most of the people, when you have these are called quantifiers. Now, this tells you whether you can consider the subject as representative of the entire class. When you say most of them, all of them, then you know that the entire class is represented. Few of them, then you know that you can't use it to represent the entire class. So when you look at that option, few of the people were diagnosed with COVID-19, coronavirus. So you can't say that the entire community can be considered on the basis of that. Then you have qualifiers. Some students who are left-handers. So you're basically saying from a set, you are looking at a subset. So these qualifiers will say all rivers that flow from west to the east. No other person born in Mumbai has done this. These are called qualifiers. Then comes the line of reasoning. The process that the method or the extension that the author makes in the course of the argument is called line of reasoning. Whether it starts with the conclusion or starts with the premise, doesn't matter. That stitching together those pieces of information, that is called the line of reasoning. Like it's very clearly mentioned, the journey of the author's argument from the premise to the conclusion. That is what is called the line of reasoning. Now, I told you this earlier. What is the strong argument? What is a weak argument? You should be able to spot the weak argument and say why the argument is weak. Now, let's take an example. Just now, what the cricketer that we talked about, it's very clear. Very clearly is mentioned those three premises, hence he should be dropped. So, it's a strong argument, valid argument. However, if you look at this one, the next, cricketer X has neglected his family due to his devotion to cricket. His children too miss him a lot when he goes on tours. This is not fair, so he should be removed from the team. Now, this particular argument is invalid. It's just a weak argument. You are talking about dropping a cricketer from the team. Why would you drop a cricketer from the team? Obviously, you will drop him if he is not performing well as a cricketer. If you are saying that he is a poor family man, he is a poor father or a poor husband, then it can't lead to his being dropped from the team. His being dropped from the team should be related to his cricketing skills. So this becomes a weak argument. So what do you call this kind of why is it a weak argument? What is the flaw in this? The flaw is that it is irrelevant to cricket. Right? How do you find out flaws? Flaws can be many kinds. But what the flaw should tell you is that Look, this is stupid. This argument is stupid because of this. It's illogical. That is what is called a fallacy. And the fallacies can be of various types. Suppose I tell you that my grandfather was a chain smoker. And he led a perfectly healthy life. One day he was crossing the road, not at the signal, middle of the road, he's crossing the road, not at the zebra line. He was what we call jaywalking. He was jaywalking. That means he didn't walk on the zebra crossing. He walked cut across. He was hit by a speeding truck and he died. So, smoking is not as injurious to health as jaywalking is. Now you can understand how absurd this logic is. And what is the logic? What is the flaw out here? The flaw is that I have used a single case and made a sweeping generalization for every smoker and every jaywalker. So this becomes a flaw. Another example here. There have been fewer airplane accidents than motorbike accidents in the last fortnight in the capital city. You're saying there have been fewer airline air crashes than motorcycle crashes in the last fortnight. So traveling by air is safer than traveling by road. Now there are flaws out here. Obviously it is stupid, it is absurd. But what is the flaw? The first thing is you're taking a very short time period. 15 days. Basis of 15 days, are you going to say that something is safer than the other? Let us say that this is not 15 days. Let us say from 2000 onwards, 2000 onwards, till 2020, last 20 years, 47,000 people have died in air crashes. During the same period of time, 1 million people have died in motorcycle accidents. So flying is safer than riding a motorcycle. Now, on the face of it looks true. 47,000 people have died and 1 million people have died. But the flaw is that absolute numbers is not what you should have given me. I should have given you the ratio. How many people flew, out of that how many died? How many people ride a motorcycle, and out of that how many died? And you might find out that out of this 47,000 people were out of 15 lakh people who flew. Whereas this 1 million people is out of almost 22 billion people. That is 22 billion, of course, not there. That's more than the world's population. So you can say that about 2 billion people. Then you will know that the proportion is much, much lower. Proportion of deaths is much, much lower in motorcycle accident than in plane crashes. So I should have given you the wrong metrics were given to you. These are the flaws. So this is how you should identify the flaw out here. Now, there is something called inference. Now, inference is also something which is unstated. But inference, the task is the listeners, not the authors. Author can make an argument. Only the listener or the reader can make an inference. And inference will always be something which is unstated, because if it was stated, then it will be the author's point of view. Author is the main source, right? Here it is something which is not mentioned, but you are coming to an understanding. For example, if I tell you that I only drink hot coffee, I'm not going to drink this coffee. Now, if you say that the inference is you don't drink cold coffee, obviously, if I've said that I drink only hot coffee, that means I don't drink cold coffee. So it can't be the inference, because that is my author's point of view. Suppose you say that you're not going to drink it. The inference is you're not going to drink it. But I did say that. So if I've said it, if it is stated, it can't be the inference. However, suppose you say, oh, you're saying that you're not going to drink, you like only hot coffee, and you're not going to drink this coffee. So the inference I draw is that this coffee is cold. But I never said the coffee is cold. This is an inference you drew. Example for this is, I don't think the recent circular to students will stop them from coming late to school. A penalty of 5 rupees for a delay of 1 hour is not much. Now look at the gap between this. The first part says that the recent circular is not going to make them stop, is not going to discipline them. And then the second part says 5 rupees penalty for a delay of 1 hour is not much. So the inference you can draw is that in the circular, what was mentioned was that any student who comes late will have to pay a penalty of 5 rupees per hour. That is the inference that we have drawn. That is not what the author wanted to say. Author has finished with his argument. But I have drawn an inference from this. Okay, so the circular meant that 5 rupees is the penalty per hour.